The council chamber on Zenith Prime hummed with the voices of a dozen species, each representing worlds that stretched across the galactic arm like jewels on an invisible string. Ambassador Thrall of the Valari stood at the central podium, his crystalline form refracting the light into dancing patterns across the curved walls. "We gather today to address a matter of galactic importance," Thrall announced, his voice carrying the musical quality his species was known for throughout the stars around the circular chamber. Representatives shifted in their specialized seating, the Kresh delegation, their massive heads pulsing with bioluminescent thought patterns, occupied the northern section. The droner military contingent stood rigid in their power armor. To the east, smaller species filled the remaining spaces, some breathing methane through filters, others existing as energy patterns contained in magnetic bottles. At the far end, almost as an afterthought in the architectural design, sat the human delegation, 3 individuals in simple gray uniforms. Led by Ambassador Sarah Chun, she sat with perfect stillness, her dark eyes watching the proceedings with an expression that gave nothing away. For 73 standard cycles, humanity has served the Council in various capacities, Thrall continued, pulling up holographic data streams that floated in the air like digital ghosts. They have maintained our stations, managed our trade routes, operated systems across 17 sectors. A Kresh counselor, Morpheus 7, projected his thoughts into the translation matrix. Yet they remain crude in their methods, too emotional in their decision-making processes. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. A Valari representative added her voice to the chorus. They take risks that endanger carefully balanced systems. They question protocols that have served us for millennia. Ambassador Chen's expression didn't change beside her. Commander James Wright kept his hands folded on the table, while Dr. Amira Okonkwo made a single note on her datapad. The debate that followed was not really a debate at all. It was a recitation of grievances. Some valid, most petty. Humans asked too many questions. Humans wanted to understand why, not just follow instructions. Humans formed bonds with species. They were supposed to simply manage humans, improvised when they should have waited for proper authorization. After 2 hours, Thrall called for the vote. All those in favor of releasing humanity from Council obligations? Every species raised their affirmation. A holographic display showed unanimous agreement, a rare moment of complete unity among beings who agreed on almost nothing. All opposed? Silence. No one spoke for humanity except humanity, and they held no vote in this chamber. Thrall turned to Ambassador Chen with what might have been sympathy in his alien features. Though humans could never quite read Valari expressions accurately, Ambassador Chen, the Council has decided to end humanity's service contracts, effective immediately. He paused, perhaps expecting an outburst. You have 72 hours to begin evacuation procedures from all Council facilities and territories. Chun stood slowly. The chamber fell silent, waiting for the protests, the threats, perhaps even the tears. She smoothed her uniform and looked around the room, meeting as many eyes and optical sensors as she could. Understood, she said simply. Her voice was calm, professional, almost friendly. We'll begin withdrawal immediately. Thrall blinked, a gesture that took 3 full seconds with his complex eyelid structure. You have no objections? No appeals? Chun shook her head. The Council has made its decision. She gestured to her colleagues. We respect that decision. Commander Wright stood, followed by Dr. Okonkwo. They gathered their minimal materials. We'll coordinate the logistics of our departure with station operations. Chun continued. We want to ensure a smooth transition. She gave a slight bow, a human gesture of respect. Thank you for the opportunity to have served. Then they left. The humans simply walked out of the chamber, their footsteps silent on the energy-damping floors behind them. The Council sat in confused silence. This was not how such things went. Species threatened. They bargained. They offered concessions. They didn't just accept exile with grace. Well, Morpheus 7 projected after a long moment. That was unexpectedly simple. Indeed, Thrall agreed. Though something in his tone suggested uncertainty. Perhaps we misjudged their attachment to council membership. What the council didn't see was the message Chun sent the moment she left the chamber. It went out on encrypted human channels to every human facility, every human ship, every human settlement in council space. The message was brief. Protocol Exodus. Authorized. Within the hour, human personnel across 70 systems began their preparations on Valari Prime. Chief Engineer Marcus Webb received the message in the environmental processing plant deep beneath the crystal cities. He looked at his crew of 47 humans who maintained the ancient atmospheric systems. Pack it up. People, he said quietly. We're going home on the trade route patrol ship Vigilant. Captain Elizabeth Torres read the message and nodded to herself. She'd half expected this day for years. Navigator. Plot a course for the Sol Sector, she ordered. All ships in the flotilla. Prepare for withdrawal at the Kresh Medical Research Institute. Dayuki Tanaka saved her files, encrypted her research notes, and began the process of transferring projects back to the Kresh scientists who had barely paid attention to the work for the past decade in the central data hub on Kresh Prime. Hundreds of human IT specialists began documenting systems, writing manuals that they knew probably wouldn't be read, trying to leave things in the best state possible. They were professionals, after all, on the mining colonies, the agricultural stations, the diplomatic outposts. The story repeated itself. Humans packed their belongings, secured their systems, filed their reports, and prepared to leave. There was no sabotage, no angry speeches, no dramatic gestures. They had been asked to go. And so they would go. Some alien colleagues expressed confusion. Why are you leaving? Asked a young Valari technician who had worked alongside Marcus Webb for 3 years. Marcus smiled at her. Genuinely fond, despite everything. The council asked us to, he replied. But we need you here. These systems are too complex. You'll figure it out, Marcus interrupted gently. Your ancestors built all this. After all, he didn't say what he was thinking, that the Valari had simply forgotten how their own technology worked because humans had been maintaining it for so long. The conversation would happen soon enough. He suspected, but it wouldn't be his problem anymore. Within 48 hours. Human ships began departing from Council space transports, patrol vessels, research ships, even the small personal craft that humans preferred for reasons other species found baffling. They moved in organized convoys, following traffic protocols perfectly, even in their exodus on Zenith Prime. Thrall watched the departures on the long-range sensors. They're really leaving, he said to his assistant. No delays. No complications. Should we not be pleased? His assistant asked. The transition is smooth. Thrall's crystalline form shifted through several colors. An unconscious display of uncertainty. Yes, he said slowly. Yes. I suppose we should be pleased. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The humans had left too quietly. Too efficiently. They had built no leverage. Made no final demands. They had simply accepted the council's decision and walked away with their heads high. It felt wrong somehow. It felt like they knew something the council didn't. In 3 days, 97% of humans had left council space. The remaining 3% were finishing critical handovers, refusing to leave systems in dangerous states, despite their dismissal by the end of the week. They were gone too. The council met again, briefly, to congratulate themselves on a difficult decision well executed. Humanity has departed peacefully, Thrall announced. We may now focus on optimizing our operations without their chaotic influence. The vote of self-congratulation was, once again, unanimous. Not one council member noticed that the environmental readings on Zenith Prime had already begun showing minor irregularities. One realized that the next scheduled pirate patrol was going to be 12 hours late because the fleet commanders couldn't agree on approach. Vectors Not 1 understood that the countdown had already begun. The humans were gone, and very soon the Council was going to understand exactly what they had lost. 14 days after the last human ship departed Council space, the first failure occurred on Valari Prime. The environmental processing plant in Sector 7 began showing temperature fluctuations. Nothing dramatic at first, just half a degree above optimal range. Senior Technician Chrysalis noticed it during her routine morning check and frowned. Her light patterns shifting to concerned orangey. She pulled up the diagnostic protocols and stared at the interface. System was asking for authorization codes she had never needed before, requesting manual calibrations that had always happened automatically. She called her supervisor 2 hours later. They called the Central Environmental Authority by evening. They had 3 senior engineers staring at machinery that their ancestors had designed 5,000 years ago. Machinery that they themselves no longer truly understood. Where are the maintenance logs? One engineer demanded. The junior technician pulled them up, then fell silent. Every entry for the past 40 years was signed by Marcus Webb or one of his human team before that. Different human names stretched back decades before the humans arrived. The logs were sporadic and incomplete. Did we not maintain our own systems? Someone asked in a quiet voice. No one wanted to answer that question on the mining colony of Droner 5. The life support system began cycling incorrectly. Oxygen levels dropped by 2%, then recovered, then dropped again. The droner engineer on duty, Sergeant Kroll, examined the system with growing frustration. The manual was clear enough. The procedures were documented, but the actual machinery refused to cooperate. There were judgment calls to be made, variables to account for, situations the manual didn't quite cover. He did his best, following the protocols exactly. The oxygen levels stabilized at 94% of optimal, technically functional. But everyone on the colony felt slightly short of breath when Kroll reported this to his commanders. They told him to fix it properly. He replied that he was following the procedures exactly as written. What he couldn't explain was that the humans who had maintained this system before had known when to deviate from the manual, when to trust their instincts, when to improvise. That knowledge wasn't written down anywhere in the Tertian corridor, a major trade route connecting 17 systems. The monthly pirate sweep was 12 hours overdue, then 18 hours, then a full day. The patrol fleet consisted of ships from 6 different species, each with their own tactical doctrines, their own command structures, their own ideas about how to conduct operations in the past. These fleets had been coordinated by human commodores who somehow managed to smooth over the cultural conflicts, who translated between different military philosophies, who made decisions everyone could accept, even when they disagreed. Now, the fleet commanders argued over encrypted channels about approach vectors, weapons-free protocols, and who had operational authority while they argued. A convoy of merchant ships sent increasingly panicked distress calls. By the time the patrol fleet finally arrived, the pirates had taken 3 vessels and disappeared into the asteroid fields. The merchants filed formal complaints with the Council. The Council formed a committee to investigate. The committee scheduled its first meeting for 3 weeks later on Crash Prime. The central data network crashed at 0300 hours local time. It crashed silently, without warning, simply ceasing to function. Technicians were called in from their rest cycles. They discovered that the network's architecture was far more complex than they had realized. 17 different protocols, 8 alien operating systems, dozens of custom interfaces, all somehow communicating with each other. The documentation existed, but it was vast, technical, and assumed a level of cross-system knowledge that no single Kresh possessed. This is impossible. one technician declared, his headlights flashing red with frustration. These systems are completely incompatible. His supervisor, an older Kresh named Processor 12, stared at the logs. The humans made them work, she said quietly. For 40 years, they made them work. How? Processor 12 had no answer. It took 3 days to restore basic functionality, another week to get the network to 70% capacity. Some systems never came back online at all. Emergency council sessions began on day 16. The chamber that had been so unanimous in dismissing humanity now echoed with complaints and accusations. My world's environmental systems are failing, the Valari representative stated. We need technical assistance immediately. The patrol routes are compromised, a droner commander reported. Pirate activity has increased by 400%. Our medical research has halted, said a Kresh scientist. We cannot operate the equipment properly. Thrall listened to the litany of problems with growing horror. These are temporary difficulties, he insisted. We simply need time to adjust, to retrain our personnel. With respect, Counselor Morpheus 7 projected, his thoughts tinged with unusual emotion. We are discovering that we do not actually know how to operate our own infrastructure. The chamber fell silent at that admission. That's ridiculous, someone protested. We built these systems. We designed them. Yes, Morpheus 7 agreed. We designed them. And then we let the humans maintain them while we focused on higher pursuits. He paused, his bioluminescence pulsing with something that might have been shame. And now we have forgotten how. A young representative from the Tertian Assembly spoke up, her voice uncertain. Could we not simply ask the humans to return? Pride was a universal constant. It seemed absolutely not, declared a droner military attach. We made our decision. We will adapt. How many must die while we adapt? Someone asked. That question hung in the air, unanswered on day 19. A supply convoy destined for the Outer Rim colonies was delayed by 6 days due to routing errors. Food supplies on 3 colonies ran critically low. The Council emergency response teams scrambled to compensate, but their efforts were hampered by the same problems plaguing everything else. Systems that didn't quite work. Protocols that assumed knowledge no one had. Decisions that required judgment calls no one felt qualified to make on day 23. The Valari environmental crisis deepened temperature. Fluctuations were now occurring in 40% of their cities. The Valari Council made a private decision and sent a quiet delegation to the human border. The delegation was received politely at a human border station called Gateway 7. They were given refreshments, offered comfortable seating, and treated with perfect courtesy. Then they were told, very politely, that humanity was no longer accepting contracts from the Galactic Council. We are not here with a contract, the lead Valari diplomat explained. We need help. Urgently. The human official, a woman named Director Park, nodded sympathetically. I understand, and I'm sorry your world is experiencing difficulties. She spread her hands in a gesture of helplessness. However, Earth government policy is clear. No engagement with Council species at this time. Our cities are in danger, the Valari pressed. People could die. Director Park's expression softened with genuine sympathy. Then I would suggest your government contact the human technical firms that are now operating independently. She provided a list of contact information. They're private companies. They set their own rates and terms. The Valari delegation looked at the rates. They were exactly 10 times what the Council had been paying. This is extortion, one diplomat protested. Director Park's expression hardened slightly. No, she said quietly. This is the market rate for emergency technical services. She leaned forward. the extortion, was paying skilled professionals, barely above subsistence wages for 70 years while treating them as second-class citizens. The Valari left without an agreement back on Valari Prime. The temperature problems worsened on day 27. A crash analyst named Observer 51 presented a report to a closed council session. She had spent 2 weeks analyzing the data, and her conclusions were devastating. The humans were not simply performing tasks, she explained, her thoughts carefully controlled. They were serving as the adaptive layer between incompatible systems, the diplomatic bridge between incompatible species, and the creative problem solvers for situations that did not fit standard protocols. She displayed chart after chart. Every system they touched worked more efficiently. Every team they joined performed better. Every problem they approached had a higher solution rate. Why? Thrall demanded. What made them so different? Observer 51's bioluminescence flickered with uncertainty. We evolved in stable environments, she said slowly. We each became specialized, efficient at our particular strengths. She paused. Humans evolved on what they call a death world, a planet of constant change and danger. They became generalists by necessity, adaptable by survival. They are less efficient at any single task than we are, but they can perform adequately at nearly any task. The implications settled over the council like a weight, and they can work with anyone. Morpheus 7 added quietly, because they had to learn cooperation to survive. Thrall slumped in his seat. We didn't just lose workers, he said. We lost the glue that held everything together. Yes. Observer 51 agreed, and they are not coming back. The meeting adjourned in grim silence. That night, Thrall stood in his private quarters, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, humanity was building something new, and the council was left holding together a civilization that was slowly falling apart. The count stood at 30 days since the humans departed. The real crisis was only just beginning. The distress call from mining colony Droner 12 came through at 0847 hours. 39 days after the human departure life support failure. Critical. 370 personnel. Oxygen dropping rapidly. The Council Emergency Response Fleet launched immediately from Zenith Primate. Should have been a 4-hour flight, it took 9. The fleet consisted of ships from 4 different species, none of whom had trained together, none of whom shared common emergency protocols. The Droner military wanted to jump directly to the colony. The Valari navigators insisted on following standard safety routes. The Kresh medical ship needed 2 hours just to coordinate docking procedures with the others while they argued and negotiated and followed their various protocols. The oxygen levels on Droner 12 continued to fall by the time the rescue fleet arrived. The colony had been without breathable air for 43 minutes. 307 Droner were dead. 63 survived because they had been in the deep mines. Where independent air supplies existed, the news hit the council like a physical blow. There were calls for investigations, for accountability, for justice, but everyone knew the truth. They had killed their own people through incompetence. The human response teams could have been there in 4 hours. A Droner military commander stated flatly in the emergency session. They would have coordinated in flight, adapted their approach, worked together. No one argued with him on Valari Prime. The environmental crisis reached a critical point. 47 cities were now experiencing dangerous temperature fluctuations. The Valari government, swallowing its considerable pride, authorized payment to a private human engineering firm. Marcus Webb and his old team arrived 3 days later. They were polite, professional, and extremely expensive. They had the system stabilized in 18 hours. How did you do that? Crystallis asked Marcus. Watching him work with something like awe, Marcus looked at the ancient machinery, his hands still resting on controls. He knew better than the Valari themselves. We learned how it actually works. Not just how it's supposed to work, he said. There's a difference. Teach us. Chrysalis asked, please. Marcus considered her for a long moment. I'm contracted for emergency repairs only. He said, finally, training would cost extra. And it would take years. He didn't say what he was thinking. That the Valari had had 70 years to learn, and hadn't bothered. That lesson was clear enough already. The medical research institutes across council space had ground to a complete halt. The Kresh scientists discovered that their research methodology had become entirely dependent on human collaboration. Humans hadn't just been technicians or assistants. They had been the ones asking weird questions, making strange connections, thinking about problems from angles that the specialized Kresh minds never considered. Dr. Yuki Tanaka had been leading a team researching cellular regeneration. Without her, the project collapsed. The Kresh scientists followed their protocols perfectly. But protocols only worked when you knew exactly what problem you were solving. Real research required creativity, intuition, the ability to see patterns that didn't fit existing models. The Kresh were brilliant within their specializations, but the cutting-edge work required crossing boundaries they couldn't see. One senior Kresh researcher, Memory 9, pulled up the research logs and realized something horrifying. For the past 20 years, every major breakthrough had originated from a human suggestion, a human question, a human what if. The Kresh had been taking credit for innovations they hadn't actually created. Pride had blinded them to their own limitations. The food distribution crisis hit on day 47th. Agricultural worlds produced food efficiently. The transport ships moved it reliably, but the routing systems that decided what went where and when had become catastrophically dysfunctional. Humans had optimized those routes, making real-time adjustments based on weather, ship availability, political situations, crop yields, and 1,000 other variables. The AI systems could handle routine distribution, but they couldn't adapt when things went wrong, and things went wrong constantly. When a transport ship broke down, the AI couldn't quickly reroute its cargo. When a crop failed unexpectedly, the AI couldn't redistribute resources to compensate. When political tensions closed the border, the AI couldn't find alternate paths. Food started piling up on agricultural worlds while other worlds ran short. The Council Logistics Committee met daily, then twice daily, then in continuous session. They made decisions by consensus, which meant slowly. By the time they decided on a route change, the situation had evolved and their decision was obsolete. On day 53, food riots broke out on 3 urban worlds. Council deployed security forces that created new problems because the security forces couldn't coordinate any better than anyone else. Meanwhile, intelligence reports from the human border regions told a very different story. Humanity had consolidated in their own sector. About 30 systems clustered around their origin world. They had closed their borders completely to Council species, but they were trading with non-Council civilizations, minor species that the Council had never bothered recruiting, and they were thriving. The reports described massive construction projects, new stations, expanding infrastructure. They're building something. Observer 51 reported to a closed Council session. A new federation, perhaps, or an alliance. She displayed intercepted communications, carefully redacted to hide intelligence sources, and they're offering the same services they provided us: maintenance, logistics, medical research, security coordination. On what terms? Thrall asked. Partnership. Observer 51 replied. Equal partnership. From what we can determine, they're sharing technology, training local personnel, building joint operations. The contrast with the Council's approach, where humanity had been useful servants, hung unspoken in the air on day 61. The Tertian Assembly announced it was leaving the Council. We cannot maintain our infrastructure. Their representative stated simply, "We cannot protect our trade routes. We cannot keep our systems running. We are entering negotiations with the Terran Confederation for a mutual assistance treaty." "That's treason," a Drona commander growled. "That's survival." The Tertian representative replied calmly, "You can call it whatever you want." 2 days later, the Margrave Collective made a similar announcement. The council was fracturing. Thrall called an emergency summit. Attendance mandatory. The chamber was tense, filled with recriminations and fear. "We must bring the humans back." A Valari counselor stated flatly, "We need them. We need to learn to do these things ourselves." Morpheus 7 countered, "Otherwise we are admitting. We are children who cannot survive without caretakers. Then we need to start learning quickly," someone else interjected, "because we are dying while we maintain our pride." The debate raged for hours. Thrall finally called for order. "We will send a diplomatic mission," he announced, "not to beg, but to negotiate. We will offer the humans full council membership, voting rights, equal status, and if they refuse..." Someone asked. Thrall's crystalline form shifted through several colors, settling on a dark blue that conveyed resignation. "Then we will have to decide whether our pride is worth our survival." The vote to send the mission passed, but it was no longer unanimous. 7 species abstained, already preparing to follow the Tertian Assembly into separate agreements with humanity. The council selected its most skilled diplomats, offered them extensive briefs, prepared detailed proposals. They sent the mission to the human border with elaborate gifts and formal credentials. Mission was received at Gateway 7, the same station where the Valari had been turned away this time. They were granted an audience with Ambassador Chun herself. She met them in a conference room that was deliberately simple. Even austere, no power plays, no elaborate staging. Just a table and chairs and honest conversation. "We have come to invite humanity to return to the council." Thrall began, "as full members, with voting rights and equal representation." Chine listened without interrupting. "We recognize that we made a mistake." Thrall continued, "We failed to appreciate your contributions. We failed to value your people. We are prepared to offer substantial compensation, trade concessions, favorable terms." When he finished, Chun sat in silence for a moment. Then she spoke. "You don't need us to return to the council," she said quietly. "You need us to save you from the consequences of your own decisions." Thrall started to protest, but she raised a hand. "Let me be clear. We are not interested in returning to our previous arrangement under any terms. We're not interested in joining the council. Even with full membership, we've moved on." She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. "For 70 years, we were useful, we were necessary, but we were never truly valued. We fixed your problems. We maintained your systems. We did the jobs you couldn't or wouldn't do. And we were compensated poorly and treated as less than." She turned back to face them. "Now you want us back because you're suffering. Not because you've learned to value what we offered, but because you missed the convenience." The truth of her words hit like a hammer. "What would you have us do?" Morpheus 7 asked, his thoughts carrying genuine disters. Observer 51 had not slept properly in 17 days. Her private research chamber was covered in data displays, holographic charts, and analytical models that would have made her colleagues uncomfortable if they could see them. She was examining the unthinkable, but the Galactic Council's entire civilization model was fundamentally flawed. 3 months had passed since humanity's departure. 5 species had left the council entirely. 12 more were on the edge. The economy is contracting at an accelerating rate. Political tensions were rising as species blamed each other for failures, and Observer 51 had finally put together why they weren't just workers. She muttered to herself, her bioluminescence flickering with the intensity of her thoughts. They were the entire adaptive framework. She pulled up a comparative analysis on one side. Council species. The Volari, with their unmatched aesthetic sense and architectural genius. The Kresh, with their incredible memory and analytical processing. The Droner, with their discipline and military precision. The Tertians, with their mathematical brilliance. Each species had evolved on worlds that were relatively stable. Volari Prime had virtually no weather variation. Kresh originated on a tidally locked world where conditions never changed. The Droner homeworld had a 26-hour day that it hadn't varied in millions of years. Evolution and stability produced specialization. Why be adaptable when your environment rewarded deep expertise? On the other side of her analysis, Earth, she pulled up the human homeworld data and felt her thought patterns stutter with something close to horror. Earth's axial tilt caused extreme seasonal variation. Its weather systems were chaotic and unpredictable. It hosted multiple climate zones with radically different conditions and experienced ice ages, warm periods, meteor impacts, volcanic winters, and life had survived by becoming adaptable. Humans were persistence hunters who could outlast faster prey. They were omnivores who could eat almost anything. They could survive in deserts, tundras, jungles, mountains. They weren't the strongest or fastest or smartest at any one thing, but they could do almost anything adequately. And they could learn to do it better. Generalist adaptation versus specialist optimization. Observer 51 whispered she built a new model, one that incorporated cooperation patterns. Council species cooperated within their own kind. Efficient Volari worked beautifully with other Volari Kresh. Research teams were incredibly productive. When composed entirely of Kreshbot, cross-species cooperation was difficult. Different communication styles, different problem-solving approaches, different values and priorities. The Council worked despite these differences, not because of them and humans. She pulled up the data on human team composition. They actively preferred diverse teams. They perform better when working with different perspectives. Their entire cognitive framework seemed built around translation, interpretation, bridging gaps. They evolved in tribal groups that had to cooperate with other tribes to survive. She realized they learned to work with different, even opposed, viewpoints. She created a simulation-first scenario, a complex multi-system infrastructure problem. She assigned it to a specialized species team, highly skilled, deeply expert. They solved it in their domain brilliantly. But when the problem crossed domains, they struggled. They had to hand it off to another specialist team. Communication delays, translation errors, conflicting approaches. Second scenario, same problem, but with a human coordinator. The humans didn't solve the specialized parts themselves. Instead, they translated between the specialists, anticipated conflicts, found compromises, adapted the solution in real time. The efficiency increase was staggering. They weren't doing the jobs. Observer 51 said aloud, her voice trembling. They were making it possible for us to do our jobs. She ran the simulation for every major system the humans had touched: environmental control, trade route management, security coordination, medical research, data infrastructure, food distribution. Every single one showed the same pattern. The specialists could perform their functions, but the integration, the adaptation, the real-time problem-solving that had all been human. The Council had built a civilization of brilliant specialists, and then they had become dependent on generalist humans to make those specialists work together without realizing it, without acknowledging it, without valuing it. Observer 51 compiled her findings into a report. It was the most damning document she had ever written. She sent it to the full Council with a priority flag. The Council met in emergency session to review her analysis. The chamber was silent as the implications settled over them. Are you saying we are incapable of running our own civilization? A droner commander asked, his voice tight with anger. No. Observer 51 replied carefully. I am saying we built a civilization that requires a type of cognition that most of us do not possess. We are individually brilliant, but collectively fragmented. Humans provided the connective tissue. Morpheus 7 projected his thoughts heavily into the translation matrix. Then we must develop these capabilities ourselves. Over what timeline? Observer 51 asked. Our analysis suggests it would take generations. Evolution doesn't happen quickly. You cannot just decide to become more adaptable. She displayed her projections. At current rates of decline, the Council will cease to function as a coherent entity within 2 years. We do not have generations. The argument that erupted was bitter and desperate. Some called for forced human return. Even military action, others recognized that humanity could simply retreat deeper into their own space. Leaving the Council to collapse, some advocated for complete restructuring of society. Others clung to the belief that they could somehow learn fast enough. Rao watched his carefully maintained council tear itself apart finally. He called for order. We are approaching this wrong, he said quietly. The chamber fell silent. We are looking for a solution that preserves our pride, our power, our position. But Observer 51's research suggests that the problem is deeper than politics. He gestured to the data still floating in the air. We are specialized species trying to run a generalist civilization. That's a fundamental mismatch. So what do we do? Someone asked. Edthorl's crystalline form shifted to a color that conveyed deep thought. We accept reality, he said. We cannot do this alone. We need humanity, not as servants or workers, but as genuine partners. Not because we are weak, but because we are different, and difference, it seems, is valuable. A Valari counselor spoke up, her voice bitter. You want us to beg? No, Thrall replied. I want us to offer something worth having. He stood, his form catching the light in complex patterns. What do we have that humanity needs? That question hung in the air. Slowly, answers began to emerge. Our aesthetic sense, a Valari suggested. Humans appreciate beauty, but they struggle to create it at our level. Our analytical capabilities, a Kresh added. Our memory, our processing power, our discipline and military expertise. A droner offered grudgingly. Our mathematical frameworks. A Tertian said. The list grew. Each species contributed something, and the picture that emerged was humbling. They were brilliant at their specialties. They just needed someone to help them combine those specialties into something greater. So we offer a true partnership. Thrall summarized. Not humans joining the council, but a new organization, one built on complementary strengths rather than hierarchy. Will they accept? Morpheus 7 asked. I do not know, Thrall admitted, but it is the only honest offer we have. Meanwhile, in human space, Ambassador Chun was receiving reports from her intelligence analysts. The council is fracturing, her chief analyst reported. Multiple species looking to make separate deals with us. Economic collapse accelerating. Chun nodded. Unsurprised? And our new partners? The Margrave Collective is exceeding all integration expectations, the analyst replied. The Tertian assembly trade agreements are highly profitable. We've signed cooperation treaties with 17 non-council species. The Terran Confederation is growing faster than projected. Chun allowed herself a small smile. For 70 years, humans had been the galaxy's maintenance workers. Now, they were becoming the galaxy's partners on their own terms. What about the Council's diplomatic overtures? She asked, increasing in frequency and desperation, the analyst replied. Latest proposal suggests a Complete restructuring into a new alliance of equals. Chun considered that. Schedule a meeting. She decided, but not with their diplomats. I want to talk with their technical people. Their scientists, their engineers. The ones who actually understand the problems, not the politicians who created them. The analyst nodded and left to make arrangements. Chun stood at the window of her office on New Harmony Station, looking out at the construction yards where new ships were taking shape. Humanity had left council space quietly. They had swallowed their pride, packed their things, and walked away. But they hadn't disappeared. They had built something new, something better, and now the galaxy was beginning to understand what it had lost. The question was, what would the galaxy do with that understanding? Chun suspected the answer would determine the shape of civilization for the next 1,000 years. 2 weeks later, a very different kind of delegation arrived at Gateway 7. No elaborate diplomatic credentials. No fancy gifts. Just 3 dozen engineers, technicians, scientists, and researchers from a dozen different council species led by Observer 51, Marcus Webb's old colleague Crystalis, and Processor 12 from the Kresh Data Networks. The conference chamber on New Harmony Station was designed with deliberate symbolism. It was circular, with no head of table, no position of primacy. The chairs were adjustable to accommodate 17 different body types. The lighting could shift to comfort species with different visual spectrums. Everything about the space said, "We are equals here." Ambassador Chun sat across from a council delegation that looked very different from the one that had dismissed humanity 3 months. Agothril was there. Humbled but present, Observer 51 had become the lead analytical voice. Crystalis represented the technical specialists who had discovered their own limitations, and beside them sat representatives from the Margrave Collective and Tertian Assembly, species that had already left the council to partner with humanity. "Thank you for meeting with us." Thrall began. His crystalline form had settled into colors that conveyed sincerity and uncertainty. Chun nodded. "You asked for this meeting, Counselor. We're listening." Thrall looked around at his fellow delegates, then back to Chen. "We were wrong," he said simply. "Not just wrong in our decision to dismiss humanity, though we were certainly wrong about that. We were wrong in how we structured our entire civilization." Chun waited, letting him continue. "We built a society where everyone pursued excellence in their specialty." Thrall explained. "We thought this was the height of advancement. We thought that by each being perfect at our particular strength, we would create a perfect whole. But we created something fragmented instead." Observer 51 picked up the thread. "We needed translators. Not in the linguistic sense, but in the cognitive sense. We needed beings who could bridge between different ways of thinking, different problem-solving approaches, different values. We needed generalists in a civilization of specialists, and when we found them, we treated them as inferior rather than essential." Crystalis spoke next, her light pattern showing embarrassment. "I worked beside Marcus Webb for 3 years. He taught me more about my own ancestors' technology than I learned in all my formal education. And I never thanked him. I never even acknowledged that he knew more than I did. I just assumed he was fortunate to learn from us." The honesty in the room was painful. Chun felt some of her anger softening, but she held her position. "Acknowledgement of mistakes is valuable," she said carefully, "but it doesn't solve the underlying problem. You've realized you need us. The question is, what kind of relationship are you proposing?" Morpheus 7 projected his thoughts into the translation matrix. "We do not want you to return to the council," he said. "The council, as it existed, was built on a flawed premise." He paused, his bioluminescence conveying deep thought. "We want to build something new, an alliance where humans are not the service class but equal partners, where your adaptability and our specializations are both valued." where we learn from you as much as you learn from us. Chun leaned back in her chair. That sounds good in theory, she said, but the reality is that you need us more than we need you right now. What prevents this from simply becoming the same old relationship with prettier words? It was the critical question. The room fell silent finally. A new voice spoke. Commander Elizabeth Torres had entered quietly during the discussion. She was one of the human representatives who had been leading the new Terran Confederation. May I? She asked. Chunchen nodded. Torres looked at the council delegates directly. Here's what we've learned in 3 months of building our own confederation, she said. We're good at coordination, adaptation, problem solving, but we're slow learners in some specialized fields. We've been working with the Margrave Collective on aesthetic design. In 3 months, they've taught us things that would have taken us decades to develop on our own. She gestured to a holographic display. We've partnered with tertian mathematicians. They've solved theoretical problems we've been stuck on for years. They see patterns we miss. She smiled. So the truth is, we do need you, just like you need us. The question isn't who needs whom more. The question is whether we can build something based on mutual respect instead of mutual dependence masked as hierarchy. Observer 51's patterns brightened. That is the answer, she said. Not rescuing you or you rescuing us, but building together. Chun stood and walked to the window outside. The construction yards of New Harmony showed the framework of something unprecedented. Ships being built using Valari design principles and tertian mathematics, coordinated by human project managers, powered by engines from 3 different technological traditions. We have conditions, she said, turning back. First, any agreement must involve genuine technology and knowledge sharing, both ways. Second, decision-making must be truly collaborative, with no species having veto power over others. Third, economic arrangements must be equitable, based on contribution, not historical hierarchy. Fourth, there must be freedom of movement, allowing individuals to work where they're valued. And fifth, this cannot be about absorbing humanity into your existing structure. It must be about creating something entirely new. Thrall listened carefully. What would you call this new structure? Chun smiled. We've been calling our existing organization the Terran Confederation. But if we're expanding it, opening it to true partnership with your species, perhaps we need a new name, something that reflects our shared purpose. The Alliance of Free Peoples, suggested a Margrave delegate. The Cooperative Sphere offered a tertian. The United Systems proposed Morpheus 7. The suggestions flowed, and eventually they settled on something simple. The Alliance, Chun said. No qualifiers, no grand titles, just the Alliance. Simple, direct, and open to interpretation. The formal negotiations took 3 weeks. They were difficult, contentious, and frequently frustrating. Council species struggled with the idea of genuine equality. They were used to hierarchies, to clear chains of authority. Humans pushed for flat structures and consensus decision-making. The compromise. The Alliance would have a rotating leadership council, with representatives from all member species. Decisions would require majority agreement, but any species could request mediation. Economic contributions would be tracked transparently, with benefits distributed based on demonstrated value added. Most importantly, there would be a prohibition on any member species being confined to particular roles. Valari could be engineers if they wanted. Humans could be artists. Draughter could be diplomats. Crash could be soldiers. Ability and interest would matter, not species stereotypes. The treaty was signed on day 97 after humanity's departure. It was broadcast across the galaxy. Some council species refused to join, clinging to old ways. Others signed immediately, desperate for stability. Still others watched and waited the signing ceremony was held in. That same circular conference chamber each species? Representative placed their mark on the document in their own. Traditional Wavelari light signatures, Kresh. Bioluminescent stamps drawn on blood seal human. Digital signatures when it was done. Thrall stood to address the assembled delegates. 3 months ago. We made a decision based on pride and ignorance, he said. We believed we were dismissing unnecessary servants. In reality, we were abandoning essential partners. He turned to Chun. You would have been justified in leaving us to collapse. Instead, you offered us a chance to build something better. Chun shook her head. We didn't do it for you, she said honestly. We did it because the galaxy is a big place. And there are threats out there we can't handle alone. We did it because partnership is stronger than isolation. And we did it because holding grudges is exhausting. She smiled. But mostly, we did it because it's the right thing to do. The Alliance's first act was to organize a massive training and knowledge exchange program. Human coordinators would teach their methods to interested aliens. Alien specialists would teach their deep knowledge to interested humans. It would take years, maybe generations, but gradually the various species would learn to understand each other's strengths. The second act was to reorganize the emergency response system's mixed species teams, trained to work together, stationed strategically when the next crisis came, and it would come. They would be ready. The third act was to reach out to non-member species. The Alliance was open to anyone who accepted its principles. Within 6 months, the Alliance had more members than the old Council ever did. The transformation wasn't smooth. There were conflicts, misunderstandings, failures of joint Valari-human construction. Project collapsed because of incompatible work styles, a Kresh droner. Military exercise nearly turned into a real battle over disagreements about chain of command. A trade dispute between Tertians and Margraves required 3 weeks of mediation, but each failure became a learning opportunity. Each conflict led to better protocols. Each problem was solved collaboratively rather than through imposed authority, and slowly, something remarkable emerged. A civilization that valued difference as strength, where being adaptable didn't mean being inferior, where specialization didn't mean isolation, where partnership meant actual equality. Marcus Webb returned to Valari Prime, not as an emergency contractor, but as the co-director of a new engineering institute. He worked alongside Crystalis, teaching the next generation of Valari engineers how their own technology worked, but also learning from them how to see beauty in functional design.